Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is episode 15. In this one, we continue our discussion about Wang Xiang Zhai's book, and Jess and I talk more about the dissolving gates in the body, specifically the lower Tantien, and how to work with that. And we have some stuff coming out on our Patreon. Jess has his Bagwas thing. There's a extra discussion about Yiquan postures. So if all this Yiquan talk is something you're interested in, there's a longer discussion there about the specific postures. So you might want to check that out. Okay, thanks for listening, and on to the episode.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We've been talking about Yiquan and the training in Hong Kong, going back to the original founder of Yiquan, Wang Xiang Zhai, in his book, The Correct Path of Yiquan from 1929. It has a lot of advice about standing. So he starts with a paragraph here. When learning standing methods, the most important thing to avoid is that your body or mind put forth any exertion. If you use exertion, energy will stagnate. If energy stagnates, intention will stop. If intention stops, spirit will be cut off. If spirit is cut off, you will become prey to your opponent's tricks. You should especially avoid tilting your head back, bending the waist, or overly bending or straightening your elbows and knees. Always use the measure of straight but not straight, bent but not bent, and the mindset of opening up the sinews and vessels. So there's a lot there, but it's interesting he starts off with not allowing any exertion.
Well, the not allowing any exertion and the straight but not straight, curved but not curved is they're both describing the 70% rule, right? They're both describing the idea that you don't go too far in one direction or the other, and that you maintain this level of comfort, you know.
And then if energy stagnates, intention will stop. He's referring to chi and e. So if your energy gets sort of stuck, then your mind gets stuck too. You know, it's definitely that same body-mind connection that we've been hearing about here.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a sense, your mind, it's like if something hurts, your mind goes to that, right? So it's the same idea that if something is blocked, right, that whether it's physical or energetic or your intent, then, things get stuck. Things don't work so well.
And he says here, if your spirit gets cut off, you'll become prey to the opponent's tricks. So this all comes down to the fact that you want to be flexible, aware, connected, so that your opponent can't trick you, basically, by using a feint maybe or
right. I mean,
trick to
the modern term is they can't psych you out. Right.
Or the gaps we've been talking about, where the gaps in awareness.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also just that thing of, like say they make a crazy face or like, do some weird movement or something that doesn't throw you off, that you aren't thrown off by their, doing something weird.
So he speaks on the alignments. He says, your head should press up, your lower spine should straighten, energy should sink downward, and your mind should quiet its thoughts. Your fingers and toes exert only the slightest strength. Your teeth seem almost closed, but not quite. Your tongue is curled to almost touch your upper palate, but not quite. Your pores, all of your body seem to open, but not quite open. In this way, internal power will outwardly express. Weakness will be transformed into strength, and it will not be difficult to obtain the essentials. So those are all the same alignments we've been talking about, I'm assuming.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the, Xingyi and Yiquan by, extension, both borrowed a lot from the Taoist Qigong world, right? And so that's the that's the Taoist Qigong part of it, that you're, using these basic principles as the sort of foundation for your physical movement, your martial art, right? So rather than your foundation being things like jumping jacks and running and push-ups, and it's your fundamentals are going to be things like cloud hands, the swings, doing squats, that sort of stuff,
and keeping these type of fairly strict alignments in a standing stance while your energy sinks downward. That reminds me of the downward dissolving we've been doing.
Sure.
straightening the lower spine. That's that sort of breathing into the lower back. That's part of it. The head should press up. That's that byway point that you
Right.
hang from.
So in Xingyi, they're given as, I would just say they're more general instructions. It's sort of like, you don't need quite the same level of detail because you're doing other things too. So it's like, you can, it's just they're more vague about it. They'll say that, but they don't really go into how to do that. They just say, keep your lower spine straight.
Right. These are the principles that you're trying to keep in mind.
So they assume, in a sense, that you can already do stuff like keep your tailbone down and keep your lower back straight and keep your head up. But that sort of thing isn't difficult for you, and that if it is difficult for you to do those sorts of things, you should probably not be getting into fights. Right. that if your body is so weakened that you can't keep your back straight and your head up, engaging in physical combat may not be the wisest decision you could make.
Right. You want to build your way up.
Right. So healthy first, then you can do martial arts,
Right. And that definitely seems to be part of the Yiquan approach of building up your strength through standing and then using sparring to express that energy. So speaking of which, he says here, it is said, the body is like a scale, the waist is like a wheel, the energy is like gunpowder, and the fists are like bullets. The spirit acts with such subtlety a bird could not escape. Furthermore, let your thoughts shrink and your courage enlarge. Have a benevolent countenance, but a ruthless mentality. Be in stillness like a scholar, in motion like a dragon or tiger. So that's some martial arts mentality. So he says the energy is like gunpowder, the chi is like the gunpowder, and the fists are like bullets. Somehow that internal energy from standing emerges rapidly and with harsh force.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of that, the metaphor there is just, because guns were the sort of, that was the technology of the time, right? So people could relate to it.
Definitely.
But, yeah.
He says benevolent countenance, meaning your face is sort of smiling, but you have a ruthless mentality. And that reminds me of that internal martial arts approach of always keeping very calm and relaxed. There's never any a lot of grunting and shouting and ki and stuff like that other martial arts specialize in.
The phrase Bruce used to tell us was, it's aggression without anger, right? It's being aggressive in your technique and in your sort of mindset, but doing that in a way that doesn't bring up anger or tension, right? That it's relaxed, it's comfortable, but the other guy still shits his pants.
So finally, the last little piece I have from his book here is, naturally, you will be able to obtain the art's ingenuity of transformation. Grandmaster Guoyan Shen often said, to have a shape or intention is in either case just a contrivance. Once your skill attains the level of unconscious action, no mind, then you will notice wonders. So he's speaking of shape and intention as Xing and Yi. He says that's just a contrivance. That's just the surface. Once you reach unconscious, no mind, then you will notice wonders.
Right, and the no mind is that thing of, stillness is another way of putting it. We talk about there being no gaps. I think those are all sort of just that ability to keep your intent from going somewhere else.
Right. That that no mind of being sort of emptiness or just total awareness, where you're not going to fall for a feint or a trick because your mind isn't thinking about the future or the past. You're just completely present in the moment. I think that really is at the heart of the standing practice.
Yeah, and that you recognize what is real, what is happening, and versus what's going on inside of your, so you're not putting up images of what you want to have happen or what you think is going to happen, and then reacting to those, you're reacting to what's actually happening.
So looking further into the Yiquan standing practice, I wanted to read a quote here out of my book, Neijiaquan, from the Berkeley Tai Chi and Yiquan master Fang Ha. And he speaks about Master Han Xingyuan, who BK Francis learned from in Hong Kong, that Master Fang also learned from, Master Fang Ha. He says, finally, I met Master Han, and then I started standing. The practice was very simple. You just stood there holding postures for 40 minutes. During that time, you would move through 8 different postures, one every 5 minutes. I'd done many things before, but I had never achieved the awareness I did when I simply stood there in meditation. So it sounds like Master Han and Master Wang would teach in that method of having a 40-minute session of 8 different postures that you would hold. And we've looked at a couple of the different books out there in comparison to what we've learned as well. And it seems like there are some similarities. There's a couple different postures that are the same from teacher to teacher, but at the same time, there's always a few different as well. What was standing class like when you were doing it back in Fairfax?
Okay, so when we did Yiquan in Fairfax, it wasn't exactly Yiquan the way I think he learned it from Han or from those guys. We were doing more the 200 Taoist standing postures, not the Yiquan 8 postures. So he was giving people individual postures the way he does in Spiraling Energy Body. But the training that we were doing in those postures was more like the Yiquan stuff. So the positions varied more than, for example, when we did the seminar, whatever it was, 5-6 years ago, where those postures were closer to the ones he did with Wang Xiang and with Han. So, when we did those ones, the physical form followed closer to what those guys were doing, where when I did it in Fairfax, it was more because it was an ongoing thing. It was, I think we did
Weekly
it for
class.
It was a weekly class, and I think we did it for at least 2 sessions, so 16 weeks or so. And it kind of was so the Xingyi faded out, so it went from doing the 5 elements to, it was mostly because of moving around in terms of space, but we went from doing the 5 element, sort of Xingyi as a martial art, to Xingyi mostly just as a standing thing, so mostly Santi, and then that became the standing Yiquan standing class, and that was about when he changed formats and just made the whole thing one class instead of having 2 classes. Well, having 2 classes instead of 4 classes. So, went to the hour-and-a-half format. But what we mostly focused on, I mean, it's been a while.
Would you start off doing the standing or?
Right. So we go right in, and it was, you'd start and you'd get in your posture because, we all had our own little postures. And then Bruce would come in and he would give us usually it was sort of layered, right? So you'd start with, okay, do this one thing, right? And then you would put another thing on top of that thing. And then those 2 things would kind of lead you to a third thing, and so we went through a lot of the same stuff that you do in spiraling in terms of linking different parts of your body to your lower Tantien. We did the stuff with the rings. I mean, there was a fair amount of content there. It was, pretty packed in. So like I said, it was
A lot of
less,
Neigong training.
Yeah, it was less. I mean, it was less about the the fighting part of Yiquan and more about just the Taoist, Neigong stuff that looks like Yiquan, but is so the wasn't a prerequisite, but you everybody there had a pretty good base of how to stand and the basic posture and dissolve, and the people that didn't last very long. I think when the class started there was something like 30 people in it, and when it finished there were I think 12 or 15. It was
That sounds familiar.
yeah, it was like I think people
Standing
thought,
qigong can wipe people out, man.
well, and there was I think I want to do this thing because it sounds like it's the thing that will help me get more internal power, quote unquote. And then they do it, and it was like, oh, this is hard. I don't know if I want to put
It's
up
so
with that.
easy.
Right? So, yeah.
So let's move on to the next section of the energy gates. Speaking of standing, so the next section that we've reached is the trunk. So this covers a lot of distance in the body. He starts all the way up from the corners of the mouth, a channel down the throat and sternum to the solar plexus. And so he's got a whole bunch of different gates that you dissolve along that whole strip there, all in sort of the front of the rib cage.
Right. So
he says a lot of people get blocked up in that area, so you want to dissolve that pretty steady.
Yeah. So this is what I was saying. I think in the last one was that as you get lower in the body, the gates are less dense. Because you got larger. In your head, it's a smaller space, right? And then as you get into your body, it's a larger space. So there's, a lot of gates, but they're a little bit more spread out. And so like the whole thing of the ones along the sternum, for example, those get closed down because people slump forward. And then that sort of affects the ones in the neck, and there's this whole, this sort of snowball effect that comes if those ones are whacked out, right? So this whole
it looks
area,
like right where the joint attaches to the sternum is this little precise
right?
little joint.
If you put your finger on your sternum, you can sort of feel the groove where your ribs are, and it's like right on that little joint there. And this stuff is in terms of there's a lot of stuff about it just in terms of energetic flows and anatomical stuff and all that, and it's just sort of it's a place where almost everybody in modern society is at least a little bit bound up, so it's a particularly poignant area for a lot of people.
And so on the other side of the body, between the shoulder blades, he says there's a large number of minor energy gates. Right. He said, especially if you're going to be an active athlete or martial artist, you want to get those going because it helps the arms and the flexibility of the arms and strengths of the arms to get those spots opened up.
Right. And as you get more deep, he doesn't go into them in this, but all those points along the spine there are part of that too. So, in this, he just picks the one right between the shoulder blades. Right. That's essentially, it controls that whole area. And, that's another one. He used to say the shoulder blades were the lost joint of the body, right? That there was, people couldn't even feel that there was a joint there, let alone, do anything with it, right? So
or take that area for granted.
Yeah.
And so the next section of the trunk is the solar plexus and belly. And then as you move down, then you hit the lower Tantien and the Mingmen. The lower Tantien is located in the central core of the body, about 2 inches below the level of the belly button. The Mingmen is directly behind the Tantien and interior to, just in front of the spine. So he goes on to say the Tantien is the most important gate with regard to physical health. All energy lines related to physical health and well-being connect here. So I think, the Tantien itself is one of the most important parts of the whole energy anatomy
Well, I mean, that's another one of these things where there isn't a anatomical thing, right? It's not a joint. It's not something you can poke with your hand. Um, but uh, this idea of like you have an upper portion, a middle portion, and a lower portion, right? So the upper portion is that's the your up top of your shoulders and your head. The middle portion is your torso down to your belly, and then the lower portion is your belly down to your legs, right? So um, part of what's happening down when you get to your lower dantian is you're um, dealing with the connection between your spine and your legs. And
Mm.
for a lot of
The
people
lower and
that
the upper connect.
right, and for a lot of people that connection is particularly weak, and that essentially is what I mean, if you were going to boil it down to one thing that energy gates as a set does or focuses on, is it's getting that link. It's getting that link between your legs and your arms and your torso, right? And that above all else, the link between your legs and your torso is probably the most important thing for your physical health, right? That it doesn't necessarily make you mentally healthy or emotionally healthy, but um, it it is the thing that will keep you from hurting yourself when you pick stuff up or twisting
Right.
or
So he
right.
says you need that physical health foundation before you go on to do any higher level qigong or meditation or whatever. You want to build up your energy ability to affect your physical body first, where you purify your energy and generate it here. But I think it's a tough area for people to feel, because I know people often have tension in their belly, or even just a blank area
Yeah,
there.
I mean, the
Would you
simplest
say like
thing is
poke in there, or like, yeah.
yeah. Well, don't poke too hard, and if you start to feel a thumping, stop poking. Um, but that yeah, just putting some attention in that area, however you do it, right? I mean, so
Dissolving.
dissolving is one way. Physical pressure, somebody rubbing it is another way. Acupuncture would be an alternate, another way to stimulate that area. Um, but ultimately, I think it's one of those things that just comes down to uh, sit with it and hang out with it, and eventually it will kind of wake up. There'll be uh, just an emergence of what's there. That's it's again, it's like anything else with this stuff. That the hardest part is um, being quiet inside and just feeling what's there, and then once you can do that, you know because what is a blockage? A blockage is something that's keeping you from feeling it in a way that's comfortable, right? That you try to feel a blockage and it just like it pushes you away, it pulls you in, it throws up all kinds of like pain, right? And so you're distracted by all of that stuff. And and I think the lower dantian is really that one where it's like, okay, aside from the fact that all your other energy lines go through that point and it's the sort of central like command center of the whole thing, just getting your awareness, your mind, your attention to settle into that part of your body seems to having a calming effect on people, right? This is why
Hmm.
breathing it's why breathing is such a big part of meditation and stuff. Is it's like, okay, well, if you breathe into your belly, you at least get some kind of physical awareness of that space. And then that breathing into your belly can kind of lead you into a sense of awareness of the lower dantian. So I think breathing is probably would be my sort of recommendation, is that put your hands on your belly
Mm.
and feel as much of that, sort of as close to that area as you think the point is, and then just breathe into it and uh, you know relax.
And over time, it seems like if you just pay a little extra attention to that area each time, over time, you're gonna get the sensation and the nerve sensation built up and start sort of building your relationship with your Dantian. But that's definitely not an immediate thing like a finger joint or a wrist joint. It's something that's going to take building up over time.
Right. I mean, it's the proverbial needle in the haystack, right? I mean, like when I was a kid, I used to go with my dad to this place called Pebble Beach, and there's these, it's all made little pebbles, and there are these little red ones, right? I don't remember what they're made out of, but it was this whole thing of like, let's see if we can find the little red ones. And I'm sure he did it just to keep, a 5 and 6 year old active, or
right.
But that's what dissolving is like. I mean, you can get down to the level of, okay, I'm just going to look for the little red pebbles, um, but you need to kind of get quiet enough to do that, because if you're just looking at the whole thing as a whole, you're not going to see it. There's too much interference, right? And so, again, hopefully by the time you're getting to the point of trying to do gates like this, you've got a pretty good ability to just sit with stuff and stay in it and not be struggling to, just hold your attention on the bot.
Yeah, it's going to take some ability to concentrate if you want to dig into these more energetic gates.
Right.
And so he ends this section with the back muscles and the spine. So, that's easier said than done. All the muscles of the back and the kidneys, the shoulder areas downwards to the top of the buttocks, that's just gate after gate through there. And then the spine, beginning at the base of the skull,
right. So
the place where the spine enters the skull, the big vertebrae in the base of the neck, the vertebrae between the shoulder blades, below the shoulder blades, all the way to the tailbone. That's a process.
Yeah, well, that's that he picks 4 or 5 points along the spine and just does those because those are sort of the central thing. And then, if you get those, the rest of the spine will kind of fill itself in. And then you get to the pelvis, which is, its own whole thing. But yeah, that's
there's a whole section on that.
That's really where, once you get to that point, you've gone through almost the whole thing of like how the body and the spine are kind of connected to the arms, and so now you're set up to do the legs, and it's kind of like it's a big demarcation line when you get from through the belly into the pelvis. It's like, whew, I made it. Like
right. That lower Dantian is sort of that crossing line where now you can just keep dropping, and the weight of your mind seems to sink even
that's
heavier.
That's the first big climb is over, and you can take a little bit of a break before things get hairy again.
Right. So now you've made it over the hump, and class is going to be over before too long at this point.
Yeah, right.
Because I take an extra time at the Dantian, and then you can sort of cruise through the rest.
Yeah. All right. Well,
all right, man. Great talking to you.
Yep. Take care.
See ya.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. Just a reminder to like and subscribe and tell a friend about the podcast if you're enjoying it. We have lots of exclusive content on our Patreon, so check that out if you're interested. And everyone, thanks for listening. Take care.